Please, she whispered, her hand trembling on his leather sleeve. Pretend you're my husband. Jack Ryder looked up from his coffee. 52 years old, road-worn, quiet as stone, and the last man anyone in Silver Creek, Arizona would expect a woman like Claire Whitmore to beg. But Claire wasn't begging for romance. She was begging for survival. If you've ever had to ask a stranger for the impossible, drop the name of your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story. And if you're new here, subscribe. You won't want to miss what happens next. The morning it all changed started the same way every Tuesday morning started. Claire Whitmore was behind the counter at 6:58, 2 minutes before the open sign flickered on, and she was already tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixes, the deep kind that settles into your bones after years of giving everything you have to everyone around you and quietly accepting whatever scraps of peace are left over at the end of the day. The first pot of coffee. She straightened the sugar caddies. She checked the paper napkin holders at every table the way she had checked them 10,000 times before. And then she unlocked the front door of the Silver Creek Highway Diner and breathed in the early Arizona morning air, dry and already warming even at 7 o'clock. And she told herself what she told herself every single day. You're okay. Today is going to be a good day. She almost believed it. Almost. The diner sat at the edge of a 2-lane state highway that most people drove through without stopping. It had 12 tables, 4 counter stools, a jukebox that hadn't worked since 2019, and a hand-painted sign above the door that read Whitmore's established 1,974 in faded red letters. Claire's father had painted that sign himself. She remembered standing beside him as a little girl, watching him climb the ladder, watching him make every letter careful and deliberate, the way he did everything. On now. Her mother was gone. Her husband Daniel was gone. The list of people she had loved and lost felt some mornings longer than the list of people still breathing. But the diner was still here, and so was she. This rush, if you could call it, that in a town of 800 people began around 7:30. Drivers, a few ranchers, old men who came not because the food was exceptional, but because Claire remembered their names and their orders and never made them feel like strangers, even on the days they felt like strangers to themselves. Hutchins, 73, widower, coffee and 2 eggs scrambled, always sat at the counter and complained about his back. Delgado, 61, took the booth by the window and ordered the same bowl of oatmeal she had been ordering since her doctor told her to eat better 3 years ago. And then there was the man in the corner booth, Jack Ryder. He came every Tuesday, had for the past 3 years, always ordered the same thing, black coffee, no sugar, and the biscuits and gravy with extra black pepper. He always sat with his back to the wall, facing the door. He never said much. He wore the same thing every time, jeans, heavy boots, and the leather Hells Angels vest that made new customers stiffen and look away. Claire had never looked away. Donaldson, the first time he walked in, 3 years ago, she had simply smiled and said, "Her booth's yours if you want it." Nobody else liked sitting by the draft. He had sat down. He had been coming back ever since. Claire didn't know his full story then. She knew what she could observe. She knew he had lost someone. She could see it in the way he held his coffee cup, both hands wrapped around it like he was trying to warm something that had gone cold a long time ago. She knew he carried pain the way some men carry weight, quietly, without complaint, refusing to put it down. She had never asked. She simply kept his cup full. And somehow, in the language of people who have suffered, that was enough. At 9:47 on that particular Tuesday morning, Claire was clearing the plates from Earl's spot at the counter when she heard the sound. 3 car doors, then 3 more, then 3 more after that. 9 doors, total. She looked up through the front window. 3 black SUVs sat parked in her gravel lot, gleaming and enormous and entirely wrong for a place like Silver Creek. And suits were climbing out. Not 1 or 2, 6 of them, stepping out of the middle vehicle with the unhurried confidence of a man who had never once had to rush because the world always waited for him, Richard Caldwell. Claire's stomach dropped so hard she had to grip the counter. She knew that face. She had been seeing it in her nightmares for 4 months. Richard Caldwell was 58 years old, silver-haired, and built like a man who had once been athletic and had since traded muscle for power and found the trade more than satisfactory. He ran Caldwell Development Group out of Phoenix, and he had made his fortune buying land that other people didn't realize was valuable until it was too late. He had an easy smile and cold eyes, and the kind of voice that sounded reasonable even when he was saying something that should terrify you. He had first come to the diner in March, 4 months ago, sliding into the same corner booth that Jack Ryder used, not knowing, was Bleak, that it was anyone's regular spot, and he had ordered a club sandwich and a Diet Coke and left a generous tip and then said, very casually, as Claire was clearing his table, I've been looking at this property. Beautiful location, highway access, open land, good bones. I'd like to talk to you about making an offer. Smiled politely. The diner's not for sale, sir. Caldwell had smiled back. Everything's for sale, Miss Whitmore. Some people just haven't figured out their price yet. She had thought about that smile for days afterward. Because it wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of a man who was already certain of the outcome and was simply being patient while the rest of the world caught up. He had come back twice more in the weeks that followed, each time more direct, each time with a higher number. His offer was $400,000. Second was $600,000. The third was $850,000, delivered not in person, but through a letter from a law firm in Phoenix that used words like fair market value assessment and voluntary sale incentive and mutual benefit of all parties involved. Claire had read that letter 4 times. She had called the one lawyer she could afford, a semi-retired man named Gerald Finch, who mostly handled wills and property disputes in their county, and Gerald had read it and taken off his glasses and said, Claire, these people are serious, and they have a lot more money than you do. I know, she had said, you should think carefully about what you want to fight for and whether you can afford to fight for it. She had driven home and sat in the parking lot of her own diner in the dark for 45 minutes, thinking about her father painting that sign, about her mother's apple pie that Claire had spent 10 years learning to make even half as well, about Daniel, her late husband, who had sat at that very counter on their first date, nervous and lovely, knocking over his water glass and then laughing at himself. Then she had gone inside and started the next morning's prep work. Because the diner opened at 7 and the biscuits didn't make themselves, she was not going to sell. The lawyers had arrived with documents the following week. Not an offer this time. Something different. A challenge. The paperwork alleged, because everything was careful and lawyerly and technically distanced from accusation, that the original property deed transferring the diner from Claire's father to Claire upon his death contained irregularities. The transfer of ownership had not been properly recorded. That there were questions, legitimate questions, about whether Claire Whitmore was in fact the legal owner of the property at 4,471 State Highway 77, Silver Creek, Arizona. Finch had read those documents and gone very quiet. Claire, he had said finally, they're not trying to buy the diner from you. They're trying to prove you don't own it. She had felt the floor shift under her feet. Can they do that? They can try, Gerald had said. Whether they'll succeed depends on records I need to pull, documents we need to find, and honestly, it's going to cost money to fight. Neither of us has a lot of. That was 6 weeks ago. Since then, the letters had gotten more frequent. The legal filings had multiplied. Someone she couldn't prove it was Caldwell's people, but she felt it in her chest had started a rumor in town that the diner was in financial trouble and might close. 2 of her suppliers had called to ask if they should suspend their delivery arrangements. A local newspaper that served 3 counties had run a small item, just 4 paragraphs, noting that there were unresolved legal questions surrounding the ownership of Whitmore's diner. 4 paragraphs. It was enough to make 3 of her regulars stop coming. And now the SUVs were in her parking lot. And Richard Caldwell was walking toward her front door. Claire turned from the window. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against the counter and forced herself to breathe. Earl Hutchins had gone still on his stool, watching her face. Delgado was craning her neck toward the window. The bell above the door jangled. Richard Caldwell walked in. Behind him came two of the suited men lawyers, clearly wearing leather briefcases, and behind them came a third man Claire didn't recognize, younger, with a tablet in his hands and an expression of practiced neutrality. Caldwell looked around the diner the way a buyer looks around a house he's already decided to purchase. Assessing, cataloging, already mentally rearranging. "Good morning, Claire," he said, as though they were old friends. Mr. Caldwell. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "I was hoping we could talk." He gestured toward the nearest table. "Sit down with us for a few minutes. I think it'll be worth your while." "My diner's open," she said. "I've got customers. Earl and Marta won't mind." He said their names without hesitation, and the fact that he knew their names, that he had done enough homework to know the names of her regulars, turned the shakiness in Claire's hands into something colder and harder. "This won't take long." One of the lawyers opened his briefcase and withdrew a stack of documents with the deliberateness of someone who has rehearsed the movement. "We filed an additional motion this morning," Caldwell said, still pleasant, still smiling, and was. "Given the questions around the property deed, we've asked the court to order a temporary administrative hold on any commercial activity at this address, pending resolution of the ownership dispute." And stared at him. "A hold," she repeated. "Temporary," he said. "Standard procedure. Shouldn't take more than—" "You're trying to shut me down," she said. "I'm trying to reach a resolution," he said. "And the fastest path to resolution, Claire, is for you to sign the purchase agreement we've prepared. We've increased our offer. $1,200,000. That's a significant number for a property with contested ownership." "The ownership isn't contested," she said. "This diner belongs to me. The court may see it differently." His smile stayed exactly in place. "And in the meantime, while the courts are deciding, a temporary hold means you can't operate, can't generate income, can't pay your suppliers or your utilities or, I assume, your mortgage." He paused. "How long could you hold out, Claire? Realistically?" Silence. Earl Hutchins had put down his coffee cup. Delgado had stopped pretending to look at the window. The young man with the tablet typed something. Claire's mind was moving very fast and arriving nowhere useful. Finch had warned her this might escalate. She hadn't understood until this exact moment what escalate actually meant. It meant standing in her own diner, behind her own counter, and feeling like a trespasser in the place she had worked every day for 12 years. She thought about Emily, about the promise she had made to a dying man. She thought about the deed, which Gerald was still trying to track down the original filing records for, which had apparently become more complicated than anyone anticipated, because a county records office flood in 2009 had destroyed or damaged dozens of documents, and reconstruction was a slow and expensive process. She thought about the fact that she had $11,000 in her business account and approximately 6 weeks of operating expenses left even without a court-ordered shutdown. And then she stopped thinking. Because across the room in the corner booth, Jack Ryder was watching. He wasn't looking at Caldwell. He wasn't looking at the lawyers. He was looking at Claire, and his expression was the same expression it always was, still and quiet and giving away almost nothing. Almost. But Claire had been reading people for 36 years, and she had been reading Jack Ryder specifically for 3. She saw something in his eyes that she hadn't seen before. He was waiting to see what she would do. Not passively waiting. Not indifferently waiting. Waiting the way a person waits when they have decided to move the moment they're needed, and they just need to know in which direction. And something happened inside Claire Whitmore that she couldn't fully explain and wouldn't have been able to describe afterward. Didn't disappear. It was still there. Her hands were still shaking beneath the counter. Through the fear, a decision arrived. Sudden and clean and surprisingly simple. She walked out from behind the counter. She walked past the table where Richard Caldwell sat with his lawyers and his practiced smile and his $1,200,000 offer and his temporary administrative hold that was designed to grind her down until she had nothing left to fight with. She walked to the corner booth. She put her hand on Jack Ryder's shoulder, and she said quietly, so only he could hear 3 sentences that would change both of their lives in ways neither of them was ready for. I need your help. I can't explain everything right now. Please just pretend you're my husband. Jack looked up at her. 3 years of Tuesday mornings. 3 years of black, coffee and biscuits and gravy, and the kind of silence that existed between two people who understood, without ever discussing it, that some wounds don't need to be talked about. They just need to be respected. He looked at her hand on his shoulder. He looked at her face, really looked the way he rarely looked at anything anymore, and he saw the fear there. He also saw something else, something that took him a moment to name. Dignity. She was terrified, and she was still standing up. He put his hand over hers on the shoulder of his vest. He said, one word. Just that. He picked up his coffee mug, stood up from the booth, and walked with her toward the table where Richard Caldwell was waiting. Caldwell looked up as Claire approached. His smile was ready, professional, already forming the next reasonable-sounding sentence. Then he saw Jack Ryder standing beside her. The smile didn't disappear entirely. It shifted, the way a smile shifts when the person wearing it suddenly realizes the room has changed and they haven't fully processed how yet. Jack said nothing. He didn't need to. He was 6'1", 210 pounds of a man who had ridden 30 years of highways and buried people he loved and come out the other side without softening into anything easier or more comfortable. His Hell's Angels vest sat on his shoulders like armor that had been worn long enough to become part of the body. His eyes were the particular gray-green of someone who had learned, a very long time ago, that most threats make noise first, and that the threats worth paying attention to usually don't announce themselves. He pulled out the chair next to Claire and sat down. Claire sat across from Caldwell and folded her hands on the table with a composure that had appeared from somewhere she hadn't known she possessed. My husband and I, she said, would like to hear everything you just said again. From the beginning. Caldwell's jaw moved slightly. His eyes went to Jack, assessed, returned to Claire. And he said, I wasn't aware you were married, he said. There are probably a lot of things about me you aren't aware of, Claire said. It was. The younger man with the tablet stopped typing. One of the lawyers glanced at the other lawyer. Jack picked up Claire's coffee cup, her cup, from the counter where she'd left it and set it in front of her with the ease of someone who had done that particular gesture 1,000 times. Then he sat back in his chair, both hands resting loose on the table, and he looked at Richard Caldwell with absolutely nothing readable on his face. You were saying something about a court order, Jack said. This was low, even, conversational. Yes, Caldwell said, recovering. We've filed. I heard what you filed, Jack said. I'd like to hear what you think happens after that. A pause. The process takes whatever time it takes, Caldwell said carefully. Simply asking the courts to shut down a woman's business, Jack said. While you wait for her to run out of money, while she can't pay her bills, while she's got no income and a mortgage and a legal fight she can't afford. He tilted his head slightly. The process you're describing? It's a legal mechanisms. Strategy, Jack said. It's a pretty clear one. I'm just making sure we all know what we're talking about. Caldwell looked at him for a long moment, recalibrating. Her husband, Caldwell said, you should understand that the property situation is complicated and that our offer, understand the offer, Jack said. She told you no. 3 times, from what I know. And instead of accepting no, you found a way to use the courts to pressure her. Right? Silence. We're pursuing all available legal options, Jack said. I know, so are we. It wasn't a threat. His voice never rose, his hands didn't move. He said it the way you state a fact simply, without heat, with the absolute confidence of someone who means precisely what he says and has never needed volume to prove it. Something happened in Richard Caldwell's eyes. Not fear, exactly. Caldwell was too practiced for obvious fear, but recalculation, rapid, almost invisible kind. He picked up the documents his lawyer had laid on the table and slid them back into the briefcase without making eye contact. We'll be in touch through your legal representation, he said to Claire. Look forward to it, Claire said. Caldwell stood. His lawyers stood. The young man with the tablet closed it and tucked it under his arm. They walked toward the door with the controlled pace of men who are choosing not to appear to be leaving quickly. The bell above the door jangled. The three black SUVs started and pulled out of the gravel lot, quiet. Earl Hutchins let out a long, slow breath from the counter. Delgado put down her coffee cup. And Claire Whitmore, whose hands had finally stopped shaking, looked at the man sitting next to her and said, I'm sorry, I didn't have a plan. You don't have to explain, Jack said. I do, she said, I really do. She looked at him directly. Can you stay after close? I need to tell you everything. You just walked into something, and I owe you the truth about what it is. Jack looked at her for a moment. I'll stay, he said. And then almost to himself, so quietly she almost missed it, should have asked what you needed a long time ago. He didn't leave after close. He sat in the corner booth while Claire finished serving the lunch crowd smaller than usual. 3 tables only. It was about the diner already, doing quiet damage to the regulars, and he drank 4 cups of coffee and read nothing and said nothing and was simply, solidly there. At 2:15, Claire turned the open sign to Clochard. She sat down across from him with 2 mugs and a plate of biscuits she'd made that morning and not eaten, and she told him everything. Not the smooth version, not the summarized, I'm handling it version she'd been giving Gerald Finch and the few friends who had asked, real version. The one that had been living behind her ribcage for 4 months, getting heavier every day. She told him about her father building the diner, about her mother working the counter beside him until she got sick, and about how the diner had kept them afloat through medical bills that would have broken most families. About inheriting it when her father died, the deed transfer that Gerald was now scrambling to verify because the records had been damaged and reconstruction was slow and Caldwell's lawyers were moving fast. She told him about Daniel, her husband, who had died 7 years ago in a car accident on a highway very much like the one outside this diner, who had been funny and kind and bad at cooking and endlessly patient with her in ways she hadn't fully appreciated until he was gone. Who had been, she said, the last person she had relied on completely. She told him about Emily, Daniel's younger brother Marcus, who had died of cancer 14 months after Daniel, who had asked Claire, lying in a hospital bed with 6 weeks left, to take care of his daughter Emily, who was 12 years old and had no mother and no one else. How Claire had said yes, without hesitation, because Marcus was Daniel's brother and Emily was family, and there was no other answer. So you raised her, Jack said. I raised her, Claire said. She's 24 now. She works part-time and she's taking online business courses. Claire paused, and for just a moment, the composure cracked and something raw came through. She's the best thing in my life. She's the whole reason I can't lose this place. Not just because it's money or security, because her grandfather built it, because her Uncle Daniel sat at this counter, because it's the only piece of family she's got left that she can touch. Jack was quiet for a moment. Who knows about all of this, he said. Caldwell and the legal filings, Gerald Finch. He's my lawyer. Emily knows some of it, not everything. I didn't want her to worry. Claire wrapped her hands around her mug. I've been trying to handle it quietly. I didn't want people to think the diner was in trouble, because then it becomes a self-fulfilling thing. People stop coming, revenue drops. Then it actually is in trouble. 3 regulars stopped coming, Jack said. It wasn't a question. She looked at him. You noticed. I noticed things, he said simply. She nodded. Caldwell is not just a developer who found a valuable piece of land, she said. Harold found something in the filings last week. The planned highway expansion, the one that's going to make this land worth 4 or 5 times what it's worth now, wasn't public knowledge 18 months ago. Wasn't in any environmental reports, any city planning documents that were publicly released. Caldwell started buying land along this corridor 2 years ago, before the announcement. Jack's eyes sharpened slightly. It told him, he said. Someone told him, she agreed. And Gerald thinks, she stopped, pressed her lips together. Gerald thinks that Daniel may have known something. Before he died, Daniel was working for a civil engineering firm that was doing surveys for state infrastructure projects. He might have come across something. He might have... She stopped again. He might have found out Caldwell was getting insider information about the highway route, Jack said quietly. And that might be why his accident happened where it did. Accident hung in the air between them. Claire said nothing. She didn't have to. The silence said everything. Jack sat with it for a long moment. He put down his coffee cup with the careful deliberateness of a man who is making sure his hands are doing something controlled. "Don't have anything solid," he said. "Suggestions. Heads. Nothing he can take into a courtroom. And we're running out of time to find anything. Because if Caldwell gets his temporary hold approved, I lose income and I can't fight the ownership claim." And she stopped. Yes. Drew a breath. "I'm not helpless. I want you to know that. I've been fighting this for 4 months by myself. But today, when I saw him walk in with all of them..." "You needed someone who wouldn't be afraid of him," Jack said. "Yes," she said simply, honestly. Jack looked at her across the table. He thought about 3 years of Tuesday mornings. He thought about the year after his wife Maria died, the worst year of his life, the year he wasn't sure some mornings he'd bother getting up. And he thought about how this woman, sitting across from him right now, had done something so small and so large at the same time that he'd never found words for it. She had never treated him like something to be afraid of. She had never treated him like a curiosity or a story or a problem. She had simply treated him like someone who deserved a warm cup of coffee and a corner seat out of the draft. He'd spent years watching people flinch. That kind of ordinary decency becomes something you don't forget. He picked up his phone. "I need to make a call," he said. "This isn't going to get fixed with a real estate lawyer and court filings," he said. "Not at the speed he's moving. You need people who know how to find things that other people have tried to hide." He looked at her steadily. "Let me make a phone call." Claire looked at him. "Who are you calling?" she said. Her eyes. "My brothers," he said. And outside, on the state highway that ran past her father's diner, a truck rolled through Silver Creek without stopping, leaving nothing behind but road dust, settling slow and golden in the afternoon light. In the corner booth of a small diner, at the edge of the Arizona desert, a woman who had been alone for too long and a man who had nearly forgotten how to let anyone matter had just made each other a quiet, unspoken promise. Neither of them knew yet how much it was going to cost, how much it was going to give back. Jack made the call from the parking lot. Claire watched him through the window. She couldn't hear the words. She didn't need to. She could read the conversation in the way he stood still, deliberate, one hand in his jacket pocket, the other holding the phone against his ear. He talked for maybe 4 minutes. He listened for longer than he talked. He nodded once. Then he came back inside. "Someone's coming tomorrow morning," he said. "A man named Darnell. He's good at finding things." Jack sat back down and picked up his coffee like the conversation was already decided. "He's going to want to see everything you have, every document, every letter, every legal filing Caldwell's people have sent you." Stared at him. "Jack, who is Darnell?" "Someone I trust," he said. "That's all you need to know right now. I need to know more than that. I just told you my entire life. I think I've earned at least a name and a job title." The corner of Jack's mouth moved. Not quite a smile, but something adjacent to one. "He's a retired investigator," Jack said. "Spent 22 years doing private investigations. Before that, he was a county sheriff's deputy. He's done work for our chapter a few times. Finding things that got lost, verifying things that didn't add up." He paused. "He's not going to charge you." I can," Jack said. "And you will. Because right now you don't have time to argue about it, and you don't have the money to find someone better." Turned her mouth, closed it. He was right, and they both knew it. She said quietly, "Okay, go home and pull everything together tonight. Every piece of paper Caldwell's people have sent you. Everything Gerald Finch has given you. Anything connected to the deed, to Daniel's work, to the property." He looked at her steadily. "You said Daniel might have known something. You said he worked in civil engineering. Did he have files at home? A home office? Anything he might have kept from work?" The question landed on Claire in a way she hadn't expected. Very still. He had a storage drive, she said slowly. An external hard drive. He used to back up everything from his work laptop onto it. After he died, I put it in a box with some of his other things and she stopped. Still have it? Jack said. I think so. It's in the storage unit I rent outside of town. I haven't opened that box since the year after he died. Her voice dropped slightly on the last sentence. The weight of what that box represented, moving through the words without being named. Find it, Jack said. She nodded. Then something occurred to her. She looked at him. Why are you doing this? It was quiet for a moment. He turned his coffee mug a quarter turn on the table. Then another. You paid for my breakfast, he said. She blinked. What? The year after Maria died. He didn't look up from the mug. I was coming in here every Tuesday and he stopped it again. I wasn't in a great place. There were a few months where I was basically operating on nothing, not just financially everything. He paused. I didn't know until later. Sal, one of my brothers, he came in one day for lunch and got talking to you at the counter and you mentioned it casually, like it was nothing. Like it was just something you did. You'd been covering my tab for 4 months. Claire said nothing. You never told me, he said. It wasn't supposed to be something you knew, she said quietly. I know. He looked up. That's why I'm doing this. The diner was very quiet around them. Outside, the afternoon light was shifting, going golden and long across the highway. Claire looked at the man across from her and felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time, the specific and unfamiliar weight of being genuinely seen by another person. She didn't know what to do with it, so she did what she always did when she didn't know what to do with something. She picked up the coffee pot and refilled his cup. 7 a.m., she said. You and Darnell. I'll have everything ready. Good, he said. He finished his coffee. He left and Claire Whitmore stood alone in her quiet diner and thought about a box in a storage unit that she had not opened in 6 years, and she wondered what was inside it. And she was afraid of the answer in a way that had nothing to do with Richard Caldwell. She found the box at 9:40 that night. The storage unit smelled like dust and old cardboard and the particular staleness of things that have been sealed away from air and light for years. She had 3 boxes of Daniel's things. She knew which one held the work materials because she had labeled it herself. Standing in this same unit 5 years ago, telling herself she would go through it properly someday. Someday had never come. She pulled the box to the front and opened it. Her notebooks were on top. Spiral-bound, filled with his handwriting, neat and small, and slightly tilted to the right, the way it always was. She picked one up and held it without opening it and stood there for a moment with the weight of it in her hands. Then she put it down and kept looking. Our drive was at the bottom of the box, wrapped in a Ziploc bag, the way Daniel always wrapped electronics, practical, careful. He had been like that about everything. Thorough. The kind of person who read the entire manual before assembling anything and then kept the manual in a labeled folder. It was small, maybe 5 inches long. Casing, small dent on one corner, from some fall she didn't remember witnessing. On you, she thought. What did you find? She put it in her bag. Then she sat down on the concrete floor of the storage unit next to the open box, and she let herself cry for exactly 7 minutes because she was alone and no one could see, and Daniel deserved those 7 minutes, even if she hadn't given them to him in a long time. Then she stood up, wiped her face, turned off the light, and drove home. Al Cooper arrived at 6:50 the next morning, before Claire had even flipped the sign to open. He was 64 years old, heavy-set, the gray mustache, and the kind of patient, observational stillness that Claire immediately recognized as the mark of someone who had spent decades learning to read rooms before walking into them. Wearing a plain navy jacket and carrying a laptop bag and a cup of gas station coffee, and he shook Claire's hand with both of his and said, Jack told me about your situation. I'm sorry you're dealing with this. Let's get to work. Amble. No small talk. Just that. She liked him immediately. Jack arrived 3 minutes later. He nodded at Darnell. Darnell nodded back. The economy of men who trust each other. They sat at the corner table. Claire spread everything out: the legal filings, the letters from Caldwell's attorneys, correspondence with Gerald Finch, property deed copy that Gerald obtained from the state archive, the county's response about the damage records, all of it. Darnell put on reading glasses and went through it methodically. Hush. He made small sounds and occasionally a quiet a short exhale, but he didn't editorialize. After 40 minutes, he looked up. Okay, he said. The good news is the ownership challenge is weak. Deliberately weak. Actually, they're not really expecting to win it in court. Pressure tactic. They're using the administrative process itself as the weapon. Every filing costs you money in legal fees. Every delay means uncertainty. Every news item that mentions disputed ownership does damage to your customer base. He took off his glasses. Not trying to beat you in court. They're trying to exhaust you before you get there. The temporary hold, Claire said. Gerald Finch should file a counter motion today. It's defensible. The hold is thin. They're asking a court to restrict commercial activity based on a deed irregularity they haven't proven, and which, based on what I'm seeing here, they don't have strong evidence for. He paused. What they're counting on is that you can't move fast enough. What about the thing you mentioned, Jax declared. He was looking at her steadily. The drive. She had been waiting for this. She put the hard drive on the table. Darnell looked at it. My late husband's work backup drive, Claire said. He was a civil engineer. He worked on state infrastructure surveys. I think Jack and I talked last night, and we think he might have found something connected to Caldwell. He died. Darnell's expression didn't change. He became very still. When did he die, he said. 7 years ago, Claire said. Car accident. Highway 89, about 40 miles from here. And you think the accident might not have been an accident. It wasn't a question. He said it flat and careful, not flinching from it, not dramatizing it either. Claire's throat tightened. I don't know. I don't have anything solid. It's a feeling I've never been able to shake, and I've spent 7 years trying to. Nell looked at the drive. Do you have something I can plug this into? He said. Claire brought her laptop from the back office. Darnell connected the drive. They waited. The drive spun up. A window appeared, and made a sound that was different from the small hams he'd been making all morning. Sharp and short, and immediately got both Jack and Claire leaning forward. Jack said. This drive is encrypted, Darnell said. Fully. Someone applied security software to the entire partition. He looked at Claire. Husband do that routinely? No, she said slowly. He was careful about work files, but I never heard him mention encryption specifically. Oh, he was thorough, but he wasn't a tech person. Someone who's not a tech person doesn't typically encrypt an entire external drive, Darnell said. That's a deliberate step. It takes knowledge and intention. He looked at the drive. He did this specifically. He encrypted this because he was worried about someone accessing it. Evan sat with that for a moment. He knew, Claire said. Words came out barely above a whisper. Whatever he found, he knew it was dangerous and he protected it. And then he died, Jack said. Nobody answered that. Darnell sat back. I know someone who can break the encryption. It'll take a few days. But Claire, he paused, chose his next words carefully. Husband found what I think he might have found, and if someone connected to Caldwell knew that he'd found it, this is bigger than a property dispute. Understand that? Yes, she said. And you're okay with pulling on that thread? She thought about Daniel's handwriting in those spiral notebooks. She thought about Marcus asking her to take care of Emily. She thought about 7 years of not knowing, and the weight of that not knowing that had sat somewhere behind her breastbone every single day. She said. The next 3 days moved with a particular kind of suspended tension that Claire would remember for the rest of her life days that felt both urgent and strangely slow. Was the way time moves when you're waiting for something that could change everything. The diner stayed open. Gerald Finch filed the counter motion the morning after Darnell's visit, challenging the temporary hold, and the court scheduled a hearing for 11 days out. 11 days. Gerald called it good news. Claire called it 11 days of Caldwell's lawyers doing damage. Right about the damage. 2 more Regulars stopped coming. A catering order she'd been counting on a local church group that used the diner's kitchen for their monthly community dinner canceled with a polite email citing the uncertainty around the diner's future. And she was. Claire read that email 3 times and then called the church's event coordinator, a woman she'd known for 9 years, and listened while the woman apologized and said she was sorry, but they couldn't take the risk and it wasn't personal. She was. It is a little personal, Claire said, and then she apologized for saying that. And then she hung up and stood in her own kitchen and pressed her fists against the counter and told herself she was not going to cry. She did not cry. She went back out front and served the lunch crowd that was half the size it should have been, and she smiled at everyone who came in, and she refilled coffees without being asked, and she was fine. She was absolutely fine. Jack came in on Thursday, not his usual Tuesday, but Thursday, out of schedule, around mid-morning when the breakfast crowd had gone and lunch hadn't started. He sat in the corner booth. He ordered his usual. He didn't explain why he'd come on a Thursday instead of a Tuesday, and Claire didn't ask because she already understood he was checking on her. She coffee and biscuits and gravy and stood at the table for a moment. Mel called me this morning, Jack said. She sat down across from him. His guy cracked the first layer of the encryption. Files on there. A lot of them. Jack wrapped his hands around the coffee mug. Documents. Photographs, what looks like financial records, but they're going to need someone who knows what they're looking at, an accountant or a financial investigator, to make sense of them. Claire's heart was moving fast. What kind of photograph? Construction sites, land surveys. Some kind of meeting looks like taken from a distance, through a telephoto lens or something similar. He paused. Daniel took those photos deliberately, hidden. He didn't want whoever was in them to know he was taking them. Darnell's working on identifying. He set down the mug. There's a name in the documents. The financial records. Appears multiple times. She waited. Caldwell, Jack said. The word dropped into the quiet of the diner like a stone into still water. Claire pressed her hands flat on the table. He was already connected to Daniel's work, she said. He was connected to the infrastructure project Daniel was surveying, Jack said. Which means if Daniel found something that linked Caldwell to corruption or insider information, Caldwell would have known Daniel was in a position to find it. And Daniel died 7 months later, Claire said. Her voice was steady. She was proud of that. She kept it steady with both hands, so to speak, because the alternative was a kind of rage and grief combined that she was not prepared to process in public. No, yet, Jack said carefully. Darnell is thorough. He's not going to tell us it means what we think it means until he knows it means what we think it means. It's not nothing, Claire said. It's not nothing, he agreed. She looked at him. What do we do until Darnell has more? We keep the diner open, Jack said. We show up. We don't give Caldwell any reason to think he's winning. He looked at her steadily. Can you do that? I've been doing that for 4 months, she said. And there was an edge in her voice, not aimed at Jack, but present. I know, he said. I'm asking if you can do it for a few more days. Because what's on that drive, if it's what we think it is, everything changes. We need time to verify it, and we need to be careful. Because if Caldwell finds out we have it, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. They both understood what he was saying. If Daniel had been killed to protect whatever was on that drive, then the existence of the drive was dangerous information. And the people who had managed to make an accident look like an accident once could do it again. That evening, Emily came home from her shift at the hardware store where she worked mornings, and she walked into the kitchen and looked at Claire's face and said immediately, "What's wrong?" "Nothing," Claire said. "Claire, I'm fine. You're standing at the stove, staring at the pot, and you haven't stirred it in 5 minutes and it's starting to burn." Looked down, stirred the pot, turned down the heat. Sit down," Emily said. "I'm making dinner, Claire." Emily's voice was 24 years old, but the tone was ancient, patient, immovable. "Sit down." Claire sat down. Emily sat across from her, haired and serious-eyed, and she had her father Marcus's way of going completely still when something mattered to her. No fidgeting, no looking away, just absolute presence. Tell me, Emily said. And Claire, who had been protecting this girl from worry for 12 years, who had absorbed every hard thing that came their way, and presented Emily only with the managed, I've got. This version of every crisis, Claire looked at this person she had raised, who was now unquestionably an adult, and she made a decision. She told her all of it. The things she'd held back, the progression of Caldwell's pressure campaign, the counter motion, the temporary hold hearing, the storage unit and the drive, and Darnell, and what he'd found, and what he thought it might mean about Daniel. Emily listened without interrupting. Face moved through things: surprise, fear, anger, but she kept herself still, kept herself present, let Claire get through all of it. Claire finished. The kitchen was very quiet. You've been carrying this alone for 4 months, Emily said. I didn't want you to worry. I'm 24, Emily said. Not 12 anymore. You can let me worry. This diner is my family too. Emily said, and her voice cracked, just slightly, on the word family. She was, and then she steadied it. My grandfather built it. My uncle proposed to you, across the street from it. It's mine too, and you've been fighting for it alone. And you didn't have to. I looked at her. I know, she said, I know. I'm sorry. Emily reached across the table and grabbed her hand. You need from me, Emily said. Right now? Just, Claire stopped, raised the hand. Just this. Emily nodded, held on. Outside the kitchen window, Silver Creek settled into another desert night, high and dark and impossibly star-filled highway cutting through it like a long, quiet scar. The call came Friday morning at 8:17. Claire was behind the counter when her phone rang. Unknown number, she answered. Miss Whitmore. A man's voice. Smooth, careful, with the particular neutral quality of someone practicing a tone. My name is Preston. I'm calling on behalf of Mr. Caldwell's office. We understand that you've recently been in contact with certain outside parties regarding the ongoing legal matter. Claire's hand tightened on the phone. I'm not sure what you're referring to. I think you are, Preston said. Mr. Caldwell wants you to know that he's aware of recent investigative activity, that he finds a pause concerning. He believes that certain parties may be pursuing avenues that could complicate an already sensitive situation. Mr. Caldwell should speak to my lawyer, Claire said. He will, of course, Preston said. But he also asked me to convey, personally woman to man, so to speak, that sometimes the wisest course of action is to accept what's being offered and move forward. Everyone's benefit, including people close to you. The phrase hung in the air. Including people close to you. Technically, it was not a threat. It was the careful architecture of a threat, the same way a temporary hold was technically a legal mechanism. Tell Mr. Caldwell, Claire said, her voice coming from somewhere so steady it surprised her, I will see him in court. She hung up. She stood behind the counter for a moment, phone still in her hand. Then she dialed Jack. He picked up on the second ring. Oh, she said, they know about Darnell. Someone's been watching. Made of silence. How direct was it? Jack said. Direct enough. They mentioned people close to me. She kept her voice low. The two customers at the counter absorbed in their own conversation. Jack, if they know about Darnell, they don't know what Darnell has. Jack said, was very calm and very certain in the way it got when he was thinking fast and moving faster. They know someone's looking. That's different from knowing what's been found. If they knew what was on the drive, you'd have gotten a different kind of call. A lawyer call, not a Preston call. She could almost hear him thinking, this is a warning shot. They're trying to scare you into backing off before Darnell's investigation goes further. Claire said, a pause. Is it working on you? He said. She looked around her diner, at the faded letters above the door, at the counter where Earl sat every morning, at the booth by the window where Marta had her oatmeal, at the register her father had installed in 984, the one she'd never updated because it still worked and because she liked the particular sound it made. She said, then we keep moving, Jack said. He showed up an hour later with two men she hadn't met. One was tall, early 50s, with a close-cropped beard and the easy way of someone who was comfortable in almost any situation. His name was Reyes. The other was shorter, maybe 45, quiet in a way that reminded Claire a little of Jack, the quiet of someone who was listening very carefully all the time. Both were Hell's Angels. Both wore their vests. Both shook Claire's hand and looked her in the eye. They're going to park across the street, Jack said. Rotating shifts. I don't want you and Emily here without someone nearby. She stopped, looked at the two men, looked back at Jack. I have to do this. Not doing it for you, Reyes said, and his voice was matter of fact, no performance in it. Doing it because Jack asked us to. And because whatever this Caldwell guy is, he's making a move on a woman. Alone, and that's the kind of thing we don't walk past. Simple as that. Claire looked at Reyes for a moment. Then she said, "Can I make you both some breakfast?" Smiled. It changed his whole face. "Yes, ma'am." Breakfast. She made them breakfast. They ate at the counter. And outside, on the highway, ours passed through Silver Creek without stopping, unaware that in this small diner at the edge of the desert, something that had been dormant for 7 years was beginning to wake up. The twist came on Saturday evening when Darnell called Jack's phone, and Jack was sitting at Claire's kitchen table with Claire and Emily and Gerald Finch, them going through the counter motion, filing. One more time, and Jack put the phone on speaker. "I've got something," Darnell said. "Big something." Nobody moved. The financial records on the drive Daniel flagged a series of transactions, moving between a shell company called Ridgeline Partners LLC and accounts connected to a state infrastructure official. Transactions coincide directly with dates when internal route planning documents for the highway expansion were being finalized. A pause. Daniel didn't just suspect there was corruption. He documented it. The money. He built a case. A case he never filed, Emily said quietly. At the phone. "He died before he could," Darnell said. "But there's more. The photograph files, I got a clearer look at them. 14 photographs. 7 of them show Richard Caldwell meeting with a man at a rest stop on Interstate 17. Got a partial identification on the second man. He's a former employee of the Arizona Department of Transportation." Finch put down his pen. "Insider information on the highway route," he said. "Sold to Caldwell, which is why Caldwell knew to buy land along this corridor before anyone else." "That's what it looks like," Darnell said. "And Daniel Whitmore figured it out. And he photographed the meetings and documented the money trail and saved it all to an encrypted drive." Another pause. And then 7 months later, his car went off Highway 89 on a clear night with no weather and no other vehicles reported in the area. The kitchen was absolutely silent. Claire's hands were flat on the table in front of her. She was looking at nothing in particular. Emily reached over and put her hand over Claire's. "Nell," Jack said. "Yeah. Can this hold up? Is it enough to take to the authorities?" "It's enough to open an investigation," Darnell said. "It's not a conviction. But combined with the accident report, the timeline, Caldwell's land purchases, it's enough to make serious noise. Kind of noise to the right people." Jack looked at Claire. She was still looking at the table. Then she looked up. "Daniel knew," she said. And her voice was something new, not broken, not angry, but something older and quieter and more determined. He knew what he had found, and he knew it was dangerous, and he hid the evidence where he thought it would be safe. He trusted that someone would find it eventually. She stopped. Nobody spoke. "He left it for me," she said. "He just didn't get the chance to tell me where." Emily's hand tightened on hers. Finch cleared his throat. "If we bring this to the right authorities, state attorney general's office, possibly federal, if there's a government contract angle, this changes everything. Caldwell's legal attack on you becomes evidence of a cover-up attempt, not just a business dispute." "Fast can we move?" Jack said. "I need 48 hours to put the documentation package together properly," Darnell said through the phone. "After that, we move." Jack looked at Claire. 48 hours, he said. She looked back at him, and she thought about a Tuesday morning 3 years ago when a grieving man she barely knew had sat in her corner booth, and she had decided for no particular reason except that it was the right thing to do, to make sure he didn't have to worry about he could afford a meal. And she thought about what it meant, that small kindness was now sitting here at her kitchen table in the form of this man and his brothers, guarding her diner through the night and pulling threads that 7 years of silence had left hanging. 48 hours, she said. Outside, Reyes and Birch sat across the street in the dark, patient and still, the small orange point of a cigarette the only sign of them. And somewhere in Phoenix, in a glass office building, Richard Caldwell sat with his lawyers and did not yet know that a woman who had never asked for anything was about to hand 7 years of buried truth to people who could not be bought. 48 hours had started. The 48 hours didn't go quietly. 6 hours into the count, Gerald Finch called Claire's cell phone while she was unlocking the diner. His voice had the tight, controlled quality of someone working very hard not to sound alarmed. The court moved up the hearing, he said. Claire stopped with her key in the lock. Moved it up how? From 11 days to 4. Caldwell's attorneys filed an emergency motion late last night, citing ongoing commercial harm from the unresolved ownership dispute. The judge granted expedited review. A pause. I need to be honest with you. 4 days is very tight. The counter motion I filed is solid, but I was counting on the full 11 days to build supplementary documentation. Nell found, she said. Not yet. Not without verification. Chain of custody. Formal expert review of the financial records. If I walk into that courtroom with raw files from an encrypted drive and no corroborating witnesses, Caldwell's attorneys will shred it in 20 minutes. Gerald's voice was careful, measured. What we have right now is extraordinary. What we can use right now is much less. So what do? We defend the counter motion on its merits and we buy time, Gerald said. And we pray that Darnell moves faster than 48 hours. Locked the door again. She called Jack. He answered before the second ring. He said, Gerald told you already? Darnell called me at 5 this morning when he found out about the emergency filing. Caldwell's watching the court docket, which means he has someone on the inside of the process, which means he's more plugged in than we thought. A short pause. It also means something else. He's scared, Claire said. He's scared, Jack confirmed. You don't move that fast unless you're worried about what someone is about to find. He's trying to get the court to act before Darnell's investigation gets further. Darnell know that? Darnell's been awake since 3 a.m., Jack said. He knows. She opened the diner that morning with a steadiness that surprised even herself. Reyes and Birch were still across the street, trading off in shifts now. Birch had gone home to sleep, and a man named Calvin had taken his spot. Big and quiet, nodding at Claire when she caught his eye through the window. The diner was half full by 8. More people than the previous 2 days, which was something. Hutchins was back at the counter. He didn't mention the SUVs or the lawyers or the rumors. He just set his elbows on the counter and said, black coffee, 2 eggs scrambled, the way he had every morning for 6 years. And Claire felt something that was almost gratitude so strong it came out sideways as the specific desire to cry, which she absolutely did not do. How you holding up, Claire? Earl said. Fine, she said. He looked at her the way old men look at people when they know fine is a performance, but they respect the performance enough not to call it out. Good, he said. She poured his coffee. At 9:15, the door opened, and a woman Claire had never seen before walked in. 40s, professional looking, carrying a laptop bag and a press credential around her neck. She looked around, spotted Claire, and came directly to the counter. Whitmore? She said, that's me. My name is Sandra Velez. I'm a reporter with the Arizona Sentinel. She put a card on the counter. I've been looking into Richard Caldwell's land acquisitions along the Highway 77 corridor for about 6 weeks. I heard there's been some legal activity connected to a diner in Silver Creek, and I'd like to... I'm going to stop you right there, Claire said, not unkindly. I'm in the middle of an active legal situation, and I can't speak to the press, Dan Velez said. She didn't move. I'm not here to get your story, because I think I have part of your story that you don't have yet. She held eye contact. It's Caldwell's land purchases. The shell companies. There's a name that keeps appearing in the financial trail that I think you'll recognize. I looked at her. Sit down, she said quietly. Velez a coffee. She texted Jack under the counter. Reporter here. Says she has something. Looks legit. Coming? His reply came in 40 seconds, 5 minutes. Jack walked in and assessed Velez in roughly 3 seconds with the particular efficiency of someone who has spent decades deciding quickly whether a room is safe. He sat down across from her without introducing himself, and she looked at his vest and then back at his face and didn't flinch, which Claire noted. You have, Jack said. Velez opened her laptop. 6 weeks ago, I started looking into Caldwell Development Group because of an unrelated story, a dispute over a commercial development in Flagstaff. In the course of that investigation, I found a series of LLCs that Caldwell uses to purchase land before his primary company enters a market. Companies. The pattern is consistent. He identifies a corridor or region where infrastructure development is planned. He buys through the shells before the public announcement. Then he either develops or flips the land after values spike. She turned the laptop so they could see the screen. I've documented 14 such purchases over 8 years. Margins are extraordinary, too extraordinary, for someone operating purely on market instinct. He's getting advance information on the infrastructure plans, Jack said. That's my conclusion, yes. But I couldn't find the source, couldn't find the connection between Caldwell and anyone inside the state planning apparatus. She looked at Claire till I found a reference in an old Flagstaff construction company's records to a civil engineering firm called Hartley Morse Associates, which 7 years ago was conducting survey work on state highway corridors. His hands went still on the counter. That was Daniel's firm, she said. Daniel Whitmore, Velez said carefully. Your late husband, at Hartley Morse. She paused. I found a police report. Single vehicle accident, Highway 89, 7 years ago. Clear conditions, no explanation. She closed the laptop partway. Claire, I'm not here to sensationalize this. I'm here because I think you're in danger. And I think you're fighting something much larger than a property dispute. And I think I have pieces that might help you. The three of them were quiet. Then Jack said, what do you want in return? Velez said simply, when this is over, access. Jack looked at Claire. It's your call, he said. I looked at Sandra Velez, at the press credential, at the laptop with its 14 documented land purchases, at the face of someone who had spent 6 weeks pulling on the same threads from a completely different decrension and arrived at the same place. Tell me what you have on the source, Claire said, and inside the Department of Transportation. See, do you have a name? Velez hesitated for just a fraction of a second. Then I have a partial. A former DOT employee named Kevin Marsh, who left state employment abruptly about 8 years ago, and then immediately came into significant money. I can't place him directly with Caldwell, but the circumstantial trail is in photographs, Claire said. Velez stopped. Taken by my husband, Claire said. At a rest stop on Interstate 17. Caldwell and a second man. Darnell's been working on identifying the second man. She held Velez's gaze. Is Kevin Marsh about 5'10", light brown hair, mole on the left side of his jaw? Velez's expression shifted. Not shock, exactly more the expression of someone whose hypothesis just got confirmed by a source they hadn't expected, he said. Jack sat back in his chair slowly. Daniel got him on camera. Claire said, and her voice did something complicated on her late husband's name. Steadied. Continued. He photographed the meetings. He documented the money. He put it all on a drive he encrypted and kept safe because he knew what it meant and he knew what it could cost him. And it cost him everything, Velez said quietly. We don't know that for certain yet, Jack said. His voice was controlled. We're not making that statement until we have more. Understood, Velez said. She wasn't arguing, but what you're describing, combined with what I have, this isn't just a corruption case. If there's evidence that Caldwell or someone connected to him caused your husband's death to suppress this information, and now Caldwell is using the legal system to attack you specifically, Claire, he must know you exist as a loose end. He doesn't know what you have, but he knows who you are. Loose end, landed in the diner's quiet like something physical. Hutchins, 3 stools down, had gone very still. Earl, Claire said without turning her head. Didn't hear a word, Earl said, and topped up his own coffee from the pot she'd left on the counter. Nell arrived at 11, looking like a man who had not slept and had no intention of starting. He had a messenger bag full of printed documents and a thumb drive and the particular focused energy of someone operating entirely on purpose and caffeine. He shook Velez's hand, asked her 3 direct questions about her documentation sources, and then sat down and said to Jack, "Okay, Velez has him too," Jack said. Darnell looked at Velez. "Former DOT. Yes, good," Darnell said without slowing. "Here's what we have." He spread documents on the table, printed financial records. A timeline, transaction logs. Was methodical. He didn't just photograph the meetings. He cross-referenced Caldwell's shell company purchases against the internal route planning documents he had access to through his survey work. He identified specific dates when Caldwell's LLCs made land purchases that preceded public announcements by an average of 63 days. Too consistent to be coincidence, too precise to be market intelligence. Finch, who had arrived 10 minutes earlier and was sitting at the end of the table with his reading glasses on, made a sound that was somewhere between professional excitement and alarm. "This is a federal bribery case," Gerald said. "Potentially. If you can show that a government employee was paid to provide confidential planning information to a private developer, it's potentially more than bribery," Velez said. "If they can show suppression of evidence," "One thing at a time," Jack said. His voice cut through cleanly, not loud, just clear. Everyone stopped. "We have 4 days before a court hearing that could shut down Claire's business. We have evidence that Caldwell has been buying government access for 8 years. We have a dead man's documentation that he risked his life to preserve." He looked around the table. "What do we actually do with it in the next 4 days? Silence. Then Gerald said, "State Attorney General's office." Everyone looked at him. "If we bring this to the AG's office not as a complete case, we don't need a complete case, but as preliminary evidence supporting an investigation into state contract corruption, 2 things happen. The AG's office opens an inquiry which becomes public record. 2, Gerald leaned forward. "Caldwell's attorneys find out. And the moment this is connected to an active state investigation, his legal attack on Claire's property becomes political dynamite. No judge in Arizona is going to approve a temporary hold that benefits a developer currently under scrutiny by the AG's office." "How fast can you get a meeting?" Jack said. "I went to law school with someone in that office," Gerald said. "I can call today." "Then call today," Jack said. "Right now." Gerald was already reaching for his phone. The next 6 hours were the fastest and most exhausting of Claire's life. Gerald reached his contact at the AG's office, a deputy named Anita Reyes Holloway, who listened for 4 minutes and then said, "Send me what you have. Talk to anyone else. I'll get back to you by 5 o'clock. Elle spent the afternoon putting together a documentation package, the financial records, the timeline, the photographs, operating information from Velez's independent investigation in a format that Anita Reyes Holloway could take to her supervisors. Sat at the corner table and wrote notes and asked careful, precise questions and did not get in anyone's way, which was more than Claire had expected from a journalist who had a story she was clearly hungry for. Emily arrived at 2:30 from her morning shift and walked in to find her kitchen table covered in documents and 4 people she didn't all know in various states of intense focus, and she stopped in the doorway and said, "Okay, I can do, make coffee," Jack said. "A lot of it." Emily made coffee. Then she sat down and started helping Darnell organize documents because Emily was thorough and quick and she had grown up watching Claire handle whatever came through the door and the habit had settled into her. 47, Gerald's phone rang. Anita Reyes Holloway. I'll put it on speaker. Everyone went quiet. "Gerald," she said, was precise and professional and moving fast. "I've had 3 people look at what you sent. I need to tell you something before we go further because it changes the context of everything." Gerald said. "Kevin Marsh, Your second man in the photographs. We have an existing file on him. Opened 18 months ago, based on a tip from a separate investigation. She paused. We've been looking at him for a while, Gerald. We just couldn't connect him to anything solid. Sent me if it's verified, is this connection we've been missing. Nobody in the room moved. You were already investigating, Darnell said slowly. We were already investigating, Anita confirmed. Which means what you have doesn't just open a case. It potentially breaks one that's been stalled for 18 months. Another pause. I need to meet with you and your client in person tomorrow morning. 8 o'clock. Bring everything. I looked at Claire. She nodded. We'll be there, he said. The call ended. The room was silent for a moment. Then Velez let out a long, slow breath. Darnell rubbed his face with both hands. Emily looked at Claire with eyes that were bright and too full. Jack said nothing. He just looked at Claire with the steady, quiet attention that she had come to recognize as his particular language of care. Daniel, Claire said, to no one in particular, to the room, and to the air. To a man 7 years gone who had done everything right and paid the worst possible price for it, trying to find out what happened to him. It wasn't a question. Nobody told her she was wrong. That night, for the first time in months, Claire didn't lie awake making lists of everything she couldn't fix. She lay in the dark and thought about the drive in its Ziploc bag in Daniel's box, about the careful, deliberate mind that had encrypted it and trusted it to time and chance and whoever loved him enough to eventually open that box. The man she had married, who had been thorough about everything, who read every manual, kept every folder labeled, backed up every file, and who had, in the last months of his life, about something that terrified him, and done it anyway. She thought about what courage looked like when it wasn't dramatic, when it was a man in his home office, late at night, documenting transactions and taking photographs through a telephoto lens, keeping quiet because he was still building the case, still making sure it was solid, still trusting that the right moment would come. The right moment had just come, 7 years late, but it had come. The meeting at the AG's office was at 8. Jack drove them, Claire and Gerald and Darnell, in his truck, saying almost nothing on the way, the highway opening out of Silver Creek into the flat, dry expanse of early morning desert. Anita Reyes Holloway was 40-something, compact, and moved through the building at a pace that made it clear everyone around her was accustomed to keeping up. She had 2 colleagues with her in the conference room, one from the Financial Crimes Unit, one who she introduced only as with the state police. The state police officer's presence made Darnell go very still. Anita noticed. The investigation into Kevin Marsh has had a law enforcement component from the beginning, she said calmly. This is within appropriate scope. They went through the documentation. All of it. The financial records, the photographs, the timeline, the connection between Marsh and Caldwell, the land purchases, the coinciding dates. The state police officer took notes with the practiced economy of someone who has learned never to show reaction. The financial crimes investigator asked Darnell 12 technical questions about the drive's chain of custody, how it had been accessed, how the encryption had been broken, whether the files could be verified as unaltered. Darnell answered everything precisely. At 9:40, Anita looked across the table at Claire. Husband compiled this, she said. Yes, Claire said. He documented this over based on the file timestamps approximately 4 months before his accident. Claire kept her voice absolutely even. Yes, did he tell you what he was doing? No. I found the drive 3 days ago. I didn't know it existed. Anita studied her. He was protecting you, she said. Not a question. A statement. Said with something that wasn't quite warmth, but was adjacent to it, the acknowledgement of one person recognizing another person's decision for what it was. Protecting everyone, Claire said. That's who he was. Anita nodded slowly. Then she said, I'm going to be direct with you, Miss Whitmore. Property case Caldwell has filed against you the ownership challenge. We cannot intervene in that directly. That's a civil matter, and it has to proceed through civil courts. What we can do is open a formal investigation into the matters your documentation raises, and that investigation will be a matter of public record by the end of business today. Changes Caldwell's calculus, Gerald said. Significantly, Anita said. A developer under active state investigation does not typically get expedited court hearings in his favor. He may withdraw some of his motions proactively to avoid the appearance of using the legal system as a pressure tool while under scrutiny. She looked at Claire. I can't promise you anything about the court hearing in 4 days. But I can promise you that Caldwell is going to have much larger problems than your diner by this time tomorrow. I looked at her steadily. And Daniel? She said. His accident? Anita was quiet for a moment. The state police officer looked up from his notes. The accident report will be reviewed, Anita said carefully. Given the timeline and the nature of the evidence, there are questions that warrant examination. I can't tell you where that leads. I can tell you it will be taken seriously. Nodded. Her throat was tight. She kept her face composed. Thank you, she said. They were back in Silver Creek by noon. Jack pulled into the diner's parking lot and stopped the truck, and nobody got out immediately. That went better than it should have, Darnell said finally. It went the way it went because Daniel did the work, Claire said. Harold was already typing on his phone emails to the court, to Caldwell's attorneys, notification that his client was cooperating with a state investigation, and therefore the emergency motion should be reconsidered. Careful, professional. Jack looked at the diner, looked at it too. The hand-painted sign, the faded red letters, she had unlocked 10,000 times. You know what I keep thinking about, she said. What? Jack said. My father always said the diner wasn't just a diner. He said it was proof that ordinary people could build something, that it didn't have to be big or impressive, it just had to be real. He said as long as we kept the lights on and treated people right, it was proof that decent things could last. She paused. I've been fighting for this place because it's mine, and because it's Emily's, and because I need the income. Really, underneath all of that. She stopped. I've been fighting because my father was right. And I am not going to let someone like Caldwell prove him wrong. Jack looked at her for a long moment. He wasn't wrong, Jack said. Oh, she said he wasn't. She got out of the truck. She unlocked the diner. She turned the sign to open. The call from Caldwell's attorneys came at 2:17 that afternoon. So behind the counter, Gerald called her cell phone and she stepped into the back kitchen. And Gerald's voice had a quality she had never heard from him before, something almost like disbelief. They're withdrawing the temporary hold motion, Gerald said. She leaned against the kitchen wall. All of it? She said. Filing. The expedited hearing request, all of it withdrawn as of an hour ago. Cited procedural reconsideration as the reason. Gerald made a short sound that was almost a laugh. In other words, they found out about the AG's investigation, and they want nothing to do with an expedited hearing right now. They don't want a judge looking closely at Richard Caldwell. What about the ownership challenge, she said. Still pending. Gerald said, without the temporary hold and without the emergency schedule, we're back to normal civil court timelines. It means months, not days, which means time, which means we can fight, Claire said. Which means you can fight, Gerald confirmed. Settled into something genuine, Claire was. You can fight. She stood in her own kitchen and pressed the phone against her ear and felt the specific, overwhelming relief of a door that had been closing very fast suddenly stopping. It wasn't over. The ownership challenge was still alive. The legal fight was not finished. There was still a hearing to prepare for, still a case to build, still months of uncertainty ahead. But the clock that had been counting down had just been reset. She went back out to the counter. Reyes was sitting at the counter. He'd come in for lunch and stayed. The way the chapter seemed to operate around this diner now, present and relaxed and simply there. Good news? He said, looking at her face. She said, so good news is better than no good news, Reyes said philosophically, and held out his coffee cup. She refilled it. The twist came 2 days later. Not from Anita's office, not from Gerald, not from Caldwell. It came from Marta Delgado, who ordered the same bowl of oatmeal every morning and sat in the booth by the window and had never, in 9 years of coming to the diner, as he was, talked about anything more personal than the weather and her opinions on the county's road maintenance. She came in on Wednesday morning, and instead of sitting by the window, she sat at the counter, 2 stools from Earl. She ordered her oatmeal. She waited until the counter was quiet. And then she said, without any preamble, "I know something." Looked at her. "About Caldwell," Marta said. Her voice was low. Her hands were wrapped around her water glass, and she was looking at the counter rather than at Claire. About the highway expansion. About why he was so interested in this specific piece of land specifically. Claire said carefully, "What do you know?" "Sister's husband works for the county planning department," Marta said. "He told her something 3 years ago after he'd had too much wine at Christmas, because she didn't know what to do with it and she needed to tell somebody." Marta looked up. There was a meeting, private, not on any official record, between a man from Caldwell's company and 2 county officials before the state planned the highway expansion, before anyone knew about the route. She paused. They weren't just buying advance information about the highway. They were influencing the route itself, the specific corridor that runs right past your property. It wasn't the original planned route. The original route went 2 miles north. Someone paid to move it. Claire stared at her. The original route had gone 2 miles north. The land Caldwell had bought was valuable because the highway would run past it. The highway would run past it because someone had paid to redirect it. Through the stretch of road where Daniel had been surveying. Through the stretch of road where Daniel would have discovered the change and the reason for it. The stretch where 7 years ago, Daniel's car had gone off the road on a clear night. The full architecture of it, the corruption, the money, the redirected highway, and the man who had discovered it assembled itself in Claire's mind in the space of about 4 seconds. "Marta," she said. Her voice was very calm. "Would your sister's husband be willing to talk to a state attorney?" Marta looked at her steadily. "He's been wanting to talk to someone for 3 years, Marta said. He just needed to know someone was actually listening." Hutchins, who absolutely had heard every word, set down his coffee cup and said quietly, "Ernie's, there it is." And there it was. The highway that had destroyed Claire's life had been moved by money. The man who had found it out had died for it, and the woman who had been fighting to hold on to a piece of her father's legacy had just found the thread that would unravel everything. She pulled out her phone. She called Jack. "Come to the diner," she said, "now, and call Darnell. We have a witness." Jack arrived in 11 minutes. Claire knew because she watched the clock above the counter the entire time, keeping herself moving, refilling Earl's coffee, wiping the counter, saying something normal to the 2 truckers at the window table, while Marta sat on her stool and held her water glass and waited with the patience of a woman who had been carrying something heavy for a long time and had finally decided to put it down. Darnell came through the door 4 minutes after Jack. He had his messenger bag and his reading lancos already on his head, which meant Jack had called him before he even left his truck. Behind Darnell came Reyes, who had been across the street and who took one look at the composition of the counter and quietly turned the diner's open sign to closed and stood by the door without being asked. Nobody objected. Hutchins picked up his coffee and moved down 2 stools, positioning himself at the far end of the counter in the deliberate way of a man who intends to stay and has decided to make himself as unobtrusive as possible while doing it. Claire made a decision in half a second and let him. Earl had known her father. Earl had known Daniel. Whatever was about to be said in this diner, Earl had earned the right to hear it. Jack sat next to Marta, not across from her, next to her. Side by side at the counter, the way you sit when you're on the same side of something. "Tell them what you told me," Claire said. Marta looked at Jack, then at Darnell. She was 61 years old, and her hands were still wrapped around the water glass, and she had the look of someone who had rehearsed a thing in her head so many times that saying it out loud felt both inevitable and terrifying. "Sister's name is Rosa," she began. "Her husband is Paul Garrett. He's worked in the county planning office for 16 years. 3 years ago at Christmas, he told Rosa about a meeting he'd witnessed. Was not participated and witnessed. He was working late and he heard voices in the conference room and the door was open enough that he could see in. Darnell had a notepad out. He wrote the name Paul Garrett. There were 3 men, Marta said. One from Caldwell's company. Paul didn't know him by name, but he described him as younger, maybe 35, suit, carrying a briefcase. The other 2 were county planning officials. Paul knew them both. Names were. She stopped, pressed her lips together. I need to know that Paul will be protected. He has a family. He has a job he's kept for 16 years. The AG's office has witness protection protocols for exactly this situation, Darnell said carefully. He won't be walking into this alone. Marta looked at him for a long moment, assessing, then she nodded. Ray Dunmore and Carl Hicks, she said. Both senior planners. Both still employed by the county. Darnell wrote the names without reacting, but Claire saw his pen stop moving for exactly 1 second between the first name and the second, which, from Darnell, was the equivalent of someone else dropping their coffee cup. What did Paul hear? Jack said. He heard them talking about the route, Marta said. The highway route. Paul said it was very specific. They were talking about moving the corridor. The original plan had the expansion running north of town, north of this diner, north of everything. Somebody in that room wanted it moved south. Through this stretch of highway. She looked at Claire. Here. And Paul understood what that meant? Darnell said. And he understood enough. He was a planner. He knew moving a highway corridor doesn't happen because someone asks nicely. He heard the word compensation used. He heard one of the county men say, the survey team is going to flag the discrepancy. And the man from Caldwell's side said the survey team will be handled. The diner went absolutely silent. Earl Hutchins set down his cup without making a sound. The team will be handled. Claire repeated, very quietly. Daniel had been on the survey team. 7 months after that meeting, Daniel's car had gone off a highway on a clear night with no explanation. The full weight of what Marta had just said moved through the room like something physical, not loud, not dramatic, just the specific and terrible gravity of a truth that had been waiting 7 years to be spoken. Why didn't Paul come forward? Jack said. His voice was controlled, careful. Because 2 weeks after that Christmas, one of his colleagues at the planning office, a man who'd been asking questions about the highway route adjustment, was let go. Explanation just gone. Marta looked at her hands. As 3 kids, a mortgage. He's not a brave man. He's just a man who knew something he couldn't unknow and spent 3 years not sleeping well because of it. She paused. Rosa said he's relieved that someone is finally asking. He's been waiting for someone to ask. Darnell capped his pen. I need to speak with Paul directly. Today, if possible. I'll call Rosa right now, Marta said. Paul Garrett came to the diner at 4 that afternoon, arriving in a county fleet pickup truck that he parked down the street and walked from, which told Claire everything she needed to know about how afraid he was. He was 53, lean, with the careful, slightly hunched posture of someone who had spent a long time trying not to take up too much space. He shook Claire's hand and said, I'm sorry I didn't say something sooner. Saying it now, she said. She meant it. He sat with Darnell for 2 hours. Claire stayed behind the counter and made coffee and let them work, only listening to fragments, names, dates, and specific language from the meeting Paul had witnessed, details about the route adjustment documents that had passed through the planning office in the weeks that followed, bearing signatures from Dunmore and Hicks and routed in ways that bypassed the standard review process. Jack sat in the corner booth. He wasn't part of the conversation. He was just there, the way he was increasingly just there, solid and present and requiring nothing. And Claire found herself drawing something from that presence that she couldn't name, but that was real. At 6 o'clock, Darnell came to the counter with his notepad covered in writing and a look on his face that Claire had come to read as his version of significant. Paul will cooperate fully with the AG's office, he said. His testimony, combined with what's on Daniel's drive, gives Anita Reyes Holloway enough to move on Dunmore and Hicks. And through them he paused. She can build the case to Caldwell. Is it enough? Claire said. It's enough to make Richard Caldwell's life extremely complicated for a very long time, Darnell said. Whether it's enough to put him in a cell, that depends on what the state police find when they start pulling the full records. Corruption case, the bribery of public officials, the falsification of the highway route, that's built. Claire let out a breath she'd been holding for longer than she could account for. And Daniel's accident, she said. Darnell looked at her. His voice was careful and honest. That investigation is going to take longer. I won't pretend otherwise. Proving criminal negligence, or worse in a 7-year-old accident, is hard. He stopped. The state police officer at that meeting yesterday, he called me this morning. They're pulling the original accident report. They're looking at the vehicle. It was impounded but never fully analyzed at the time because it was ruled accidental. He held her gaze. They're going to look properly this time, Claire. She nodded. She couldn't speak for a moment. He kept a record, she finally said. He kept every record. He was thorough about everything. Nell said, and it's going to matter. After everyone had gone, Claire sat at the counter alone with a cup of cold coffee and her phone, and she did something she had been thinking about doing for 3 days. She called Daniel's mother. Helen Whitmore was 78 and lived in Tucson and called people every Sunday without fail, and never once in 7 years had stopped treating Claire as her daughter. She picked up on the second ring. Claire, she said, warm and immediate. I was just thinking about you, Helen. Claire pressed the phone against her ear. I have to tell you something. It's about Daniel. Helen's. Tell me, Helen said, so she did. She kept it careful and honest. And she didn't speculate about what she didn't know yet, but she told Helen about the drive and what was on it and what Daniel had been doing in the months before his death and what the state police were now looking at. Helen was quiet for a long time after Claire finished. Then she said, he knew, didn't he? He knew it was dangerous, and he kept going. Yes, Claire said. That's... Helen's voice broke at the edges. At the edges. She pulled it back. That is the most Daniel thing I've ever heard. Claire laughed, suddenly and unexpectedly, and then her eyes were wet, and she wiped them with the back of her wrist and said, I know. That's what I thought too. He loved you very much, Helen said. He trusted you to find it eventually. It took me 7 years, Claire said. Found it, Helen said simply. That's what matters. 3 days later, the story broke. Not through Caldwell's attorneys, not through the court. Sandra Velez and the Arizona Sentinel, who published the first piece on Wednesday morning, carefully sourced, specifically focused on the land acquisition pattern, and the shell companies, referencing only that a state investigation was underway and that new evidence had emerged. No names from Paul Garrett, who was being protected. No direct reference to Daniel, yet that piece was coming, Velez had told Claire, but she was holding it until the investigation had progressed enough that it couldn't be suppressed. The story was picked up by 2 Phoenix television stations by noon. By 3 in the afternoon, Claire's phone was ringing in a way it had never rung before. Other journalists, a consumer advocacy group in Phoenix, and 3 separate calls from people in other Arizona towns who said some version of the same thing. Caldwell did something similar to us. We thought we were alone. They weren't alone. They had never been alone. Claire stood in her kitchen fielding calls and felt something shift in the shape of what she was fighting. It wasn't just her diner anymore. It had never been just her diner. A pattern, a system, a machine that ran on silence and isolation, and the assumption that individual people without money or power couldn't sustain a fight. Caldwell had done this 14 times across 8 years because each time the target was alone. She called Jack. Did you see it? She said. I saw it, he said. Are you holding up? I'm good, she said. And it was true in a way it hadn't been true in months. Other people are calling. People he's done this to before. No, he said. Darnell's been getting calls too. People who looked at the Sentinel story and recognized the pattern. This is bigger than I thought, she said. It was always bigger than you thought, he said. You were just the person who had enough to finally pull the thread. He was. She stood in her kitchen with the phone, warm against her ear, and the afternoon light coming through the window, and she thought about her father painting the sign above the door. A about what he'd said that the diner was proof that ordinary people could build something real. Maybe, she thought, it was also proof of something else. That ordinary people could dismantle something rotten if they were stubborn enough, if they kept the lights on, refused to sell. Jack, she said. Yeah, thank you. I know I've said it before, but I mean it differently every time. Thank you. He was quiet for a moment. You thanked me by treating me like a person when I'd forgotten what that felt like, he said. We're past thank you, Claire. We're just stopped. Differently, we're just in this. Yeah, she said. The hearing that had been expedited and then unexpedited and then rescheduled twice came finally on a Thursday, 2 days after Richard Caldwell had walked into the Silver Creek Highway Diner with his lawyers and his briefcases and his $1,200,000 offer and his absolute certainty that he was dealing with a woman who had no power. House in the county seat was 40 minutes from Silver Creek. Claire drove herself. Emily sat in the passenger seat. Finch followed in his own car. Darnell followed after Gerald. Behind Darnell's car, in a loose formation that made other drivers slow down and look, came 9 motorcycles. In front, Reyes and Calvin and Birch behind him. He was 5 more men from the chapter, some of whom Claire had never met, who had apparently decided on their own that this was the kind of thing worth showing up for. Emily watched them in the side mirror and said nothing for a moment. Then, is this normal for them? I don't think so, Claire said. It's Emily stopped. It's really something, Claire. Yeah, Claire said. It is. She kept her eyes on the road and her hands steady on the wheel, and the convoy of 9 motorcycles behind her filled the highway with a sound that the dry Arizona morning absorbed without complaint. The courtroom was smaller than Claire had expected. Wood paneling, fluorescent lights, rows of plastic chairs that were more filled than she had anticipated because people had come. Earl Hutchins was in the 3rd row. Marta Delgado sat beside him. Paul Garrett, nervous and upright, was near the back, with Rosa, and a woman Claire assumed was their attorney. Faces she recognized from the diner, people she had served coffee to for years, people whose names she knew, and whose stories she carried, and who had apparently decided that a Thursday morning in a county courtroom was worth their time. And there were people she didn't recognize, people from Phoenix she learned later, from Flagstaff, from 2 other towns where Caldwell had operated, people who had seen the Sentinel story and made the drive. Caldwell was at the other table with 3 attorneys, all of them in suits that cost more than some of the cars in the parking lot. He looked composed. He looked the way he always looked, controlled, prepared, entirely certain that money would find a way. He looked at the room when he came in. He looked at the filled seats. He looked at the faces he hadn't expected. And Claire watched his eyes move and settle and calculate, and for just a fraction of a second, barely visible, gone almost before it appeared she saw it. He hadn't expected this. He had expected a tired woman and a small-town lawyer in an empty courtroom where money and legal procedure would do their quiet, grinding work. He had not expected a room. Gerald was extraordinary. Claire had known him as a semi-retired small-town lawyer who mostly handled wills, and she had trusted him because she had no choice, and she had been slightly afraid that this was not enough. She was wrong. He stood in front of the judge, a woman named Elaine Cho, who had been on the county bench for 14 years and had the particular judicial patience of someone who has seen every variety of human foolishness and maintained a clear and functional compassion for all of it. And he presented the counter motion with a precision and a quiet authority that made the room lean forward. He laid out the ownership documentation, the original deed reconstructed from state archives, the chain of title that was, he argued, entirely intact and valid despite the damaged county records, because the damage to the county records affected many documents from that period, and the standard of proof required to invalidate a long-established property ownership on the basis of those damaged records was substantially higher than what Caldwell's filing suggested. He then addressed what he called the context of the filing. Your Honor, he said, my client has been subjected to a legal challenge to her property ownership that coincides with remarkable precision with the period in which a state attorney general investigation has opened into the business practices of the party bringing that challenge. Court should understand that this is not an unrelated coincidence. This is a pattern, the use of the legal process itself as a mechanism of pressure that has been documented in multiple jurisdictions where this same developer has operated. Caldwell's lead attorney objected. The judge sustained a portion of it, overruled another portion, and asked Gerald to confine his statements to the matter before the court. But the room had heard it. Caldwell's attorney presented their case: the deed irregularities, the damaged records, the uncertainty of the chain of title. Well-constructed, expensive and well-constructed. Claire sat at the table next to Gerald and watched Judge Cho's face and saw something that she read, maybe wrongly, maybe exactly right, as a woman who had read the Sentinel story and understood what she was looking at. The hearing lasted 2 hours and 40 minutes. At the end of it, Judge Cho took off her reading glasses and looked at both tables. The motion to establish contested ownership of the property at 4,471 State Highway 77 is denied, she said. And the evidence presented is insufficient to overcome the presumption of valid title held by the current owner of record. The temporary hold motion, which was withdrawn by the petitioner prior to this hearing, is confirmed as moot. She looked at Caldwell's table with the particular look of a judge who is being very careful about what she puts on the record but wants something understood anyway. The court notes that actions taken to create commercial uncertainty around a property owner's standing without sufficient evidentiary basis for the underlying legal challenge are not without consequence for the party bringing such actions. I would encourage counsel to consider that carefully going forward. She set down her glasses. The diner, she said, belongs to Miss Whitmore. The courtroom made a sound. Not applause, it was still a courtroom, but an exhalation, a collective release of held breath that moved through the filled rows like wind through grass. Hutchins pressed his lips together very hard and looked at the ceiling. Delgado put her hand over her mouth. Emily grabbed Claire's arm with both hands. Claire sat very still for a moment. The diner belongs to Miss Whitmore. 7 words. 12 words if you counted the judge's full sentence. She had heard longer sentences in her life and been less affected by them. Harold was already gathering papers, professional and precise, but his hands were slightly less steady than usual. He leaned over to Claire and said very quietly, "Your father would have been proud." She nodded. She couldn't speak. Jack was in the back row. He wasn't a demonstrative man, she knew that. He didn't move or call out or do anything that you would notice if you weren't looking specifically for him. Claire turned and found him in the row, and he held her gaze for a moment, and he gave her a nod that was small and steady and meant everything that was too large to fit into the courtroom. She nodded back. Outside in the parking lot, Caldwell came out of the courthouse ahead of his attorneys and walked toward his car, and he passed close enough to Claire that she could have spoken to him. He didn't look at her. He kept his eyes straight ahead and his jaw set and his pace controlled. And he had the particular look of a man who has already begun the internal process of deciding this isn't over and planning his next move. As he passed her, Claire said, "Mr. Caldwell." And he stopped, he turned. His eyes were cold and composed and revealing nothing. "My husband found out what you did," she said. "He kept the records. He trusted that it would matter eventually." She held his gaze. "It matters now." Caldwell looked at her for 3 seconds. Not flinching, not reacting, running his calculations behind those flat, careful eyes. Then he turned and kept walking. 2 of his attorneys exchanged a look. Watched him go. Jack appeared beside her. He didn't say anything. He just stood there, which was what he always did and which was always exactly enough. "Is it wrong that I wanted him to say something?" she said quietly. "Some kind of acknowledgement." "Something, no," Jack said. "It's human. He's going to keep fighting," she said. "The AG's investigation isn't over. His lawyers will find another angle on the ownership if they can." "Probably," Jack said. "So this isn't the end." "No," he said. "But it's not nothing either." She looked at the courthouse, at the cars in the parking lot, at Earl and Marta coming down the steps, Earl's hand under Marta's elbow on the stairs. at Paul Garrett, who had come and testified and was now talking to his wife Rosa, with the particular relieved animation of a man who has finally put down something very heavy. At Emily, standing on the courthouse steps with her phone pressed to her ear, and from the expression on Emily's face, talking to someone who mattered, and then Emily looked across the parking lot, caught Claire's eye, and gave her a smile so bright and unguarded that Claire felt it land somewhere in her chest like a physical thing. At 9 motorcycles in a row along the far edge of the lot, and the men beside them who had driven 40 minutes on a Thursday morning for a woman they'd mostly known for 3 weeks. Colonels, who had been awake since 3 a.m. for days, now leaning against his car with his arms crossed and his eyes closed, face tilted up, and just breathing. At Sandra Velez, who was on her own phone in the corner of the lot, and who caught Claire's eye and gave her a brief, professional nod that nonetheless had something warm underneath it. Claire said, "Yeah, this is a lot of people." Down the parking lot. "Yeah," he said. "It is. I used to think when things were at their worst this past year, I used to think that I was doing everything right and it still wasn't enough. That you could be decent and work hard and keep your promises and still end up losing. That the world wasn't actually fair and no one was going to come." She paused. "I was wrong about the last part." Jack was quiet for a moment. "Already here," he said. "They just needed to know you'd let them be." She looked at him. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the parking lot, at the people in it, with an expression that was too complicated to read, entirely something that was partly the quiet of an old wound, touched, and partly the particular softness of a man who has found, effectively, that the world still has the capacity to surprise him. She thought about Maria, about what it cost to lose the person who was your person, how you rebuilt around that, or tried to, and how the trying looked different for everyone. She would have liked this, Claire said. "Yeah," Claire said simply. He was quiet. "Then yeah," he said, and his voice was different for just a moment, not broken, open. She would have had about 14 opinions about all of it, and she would have been right about 12 of them. Claire laughed. He smiled, a real one, the kind that changed his whole face, and she had seen maybe 4 times in 3 years of Tuesday mornings, and had understood. Each time was significant. "On," she said. "I'm buying everyone lunch. Back at the diner. I know I don't have to," she said. "That's the point." She turned and raised her voice across the parking lot at Darnell and Emily and Gerald and Earl and Marta and Reyes and Calvin and the men from the chapter whose names she was still learning. "Everybody, Silver Creek, I'm making biscuits." Darnell opened his eyes and pushed off his car from his motorcycle and grinned. Hutchins, who was already moving toward his truck, called out, "One, I was wondering when you were going to get around to that." And in the parking lot of a county courthouse on a Thursday morning in Arizona, a collection of entirely ordinary and entirely extraordinary people began moving toward their vehicles, toward the highway, toward a small diner at the edge of the desert where the lights were always on and the coffee was always hot. A woman who had spent years giving everything she had to everyone around her was finally completely surrounded by people who were doing the same for her. The sign above the door still said Whitmore's in faded red letters. It was going to stay that way. The biscuits were already in the oven by the time the first motorcycle pulled into the gravel lot. Claire had driven faster than she normally drove because she needed the 20 minutes between the courthouse and the diner to do something with her hands. Kneading dough, measuring flour, moving through a kitchen she had worked in for 12 years with the kind of muscle memory that required nothing from her brain and gave her body something to do while her heart caught up with everything that had just. Emily came through the back door 4 minutes after Claire and didn't say a word. She washed her hands, tied her apron, and started pulling plates from the shelf. And the two of them moved around each other in the kitchen the way they had for years, no collision, no instruction, just the practiced ease of people who know each other's rhythms so well that shared space becomes a kind of conversation. They heard the motorcycles pull in, then Earl's truck, Gerald's sedan, then the sound of voices, more than one, growing in the lot outside. Emily looked at Claire. How many are we feeding? All of them, Claire said. How many is all of them? I don't know yet, Claire said. Start the coffee. Emily started the coffee. The front door opened and the diner filled up in a way it hadn't filled in months. Earl took his counter stool without being told. Marta slid into the booth by the window. Elle and Gerald took the big table near the back. And Calvin. And the other chapter, men pulled chairs from two tables together without asking permission and sat down in a loud, comfortable sprawl that should have looked wrong in Claire's diner and somehow didn't. Jack came in last. He stood just inside the door for a moment, looking at the room, and Claire looked up from behind the counter and caught his eye, and something passed between them that neither of them could have put into words, and neither of them tried to. He sat in the corner booth. His booth. She brought his coffee first, because that was the order of things, and she set it in front of him, and he wrapped both hands around it, and she stood there for a moment because there was something she wanted to say, and she hadn't found the right words for it yet. He said, reading her face the way he'd apparently been reading it without her knowing for 3 years. Nothing, she said. Just you're in your booth. It's Tuesday, he said. It's Thursday, she said. Is it? He looked at the window. Felt like a Tuesday. And she laughed. And the laugh was completely real and completely unguarded. And Reyes, from 3 tables away, up and grinned at nobody in particular. The meal lasted 2 hours. Not because the food took that long. Claire and Emily worked fast and there was enough of everything, but because nobody wanted to leave. The conversation moved away. Conversations move when people have been through something together, and the relief of it being over hasn't worn off yet. Out in places, quiet in others. Darnell and Gerald got into a technical discussion about evidentiary standards that Claire didn't follow, but that seemed important to both of them. Marta told Earl something that made him laugh, his dry, short laugh that Claire had always loved. Had a long conversation with Emily about the online business courses she was taking, and Claire, passing with the coffee pot, caught enough of it to understand that Reyes had done something similar after leaving the military and had practical things to say about it. She kept moving, refilling cups, bringing out more biscuits, doing what she had done in this diner for 12 years. It felt different. It had always felt like maintenance before keeping the place going, keeping the lights on, keeping the promises she'd made. It felt like something else. Like the ordinary work of tending to people who were actually genuinely hers. She was clearing plates from Darnell's table when he caught her arm lightly. I got a call this morning, he said. His voice dropped to the level for her ears only. From police investigator. They've had 2 forensic engineers look at the report from Daniel's accident. Went still. And, she said, there was evidence of brake line failure. Original report noted it and attributed it to impact damage from the crash. Darnell looked at her steadily. Forensic review says the failure pattern is inconsistent with impact. It's consistent with targeted damage. The plate in her hands felt suddenly heavier. They can prove it, she said. They can present a strong forensic argument that the failure was pre-crash rather than caused by the crash. That translates to a criminal case against an individual. Depends on who they can connect to it. He held her gaze. But Claire, the investigation into Caldwell's business practices now includes a criminal component. The state attorney general's office and the state police are coordinating. And Kevin Marsh was arrested this morning. She stared at him. Marsh was arrested, she repeated. At 6 a.m. 3 charges, including bribery of a public official and fraud. He is already signaling he may cooperate with prosecutors. Darnell paused. When a man like Marsh starts cooperating, Claire, the people above him get nervous. Very nervous. She understood what he was saying without him saying it. Well, how long, she said. I don't know, Darnell said honestly. These things take time, but the dominoes are moving. She nodded. She needed a moment and she couldn't take one right now, so she filed at the brake line. This report. Mish in custody. The dominoes filed it into place. She kept things that were too large to process in public, and she kept moving. When she passed the corner booth, she stopped. Was arrested this morning, she said quietly to Jack. He looked up at her. Read her face. All of it, the grief and the relief and the anger and the particular ache of a confirmation you had always suspected and had always hoped you were wrong about. Hey, he said, not minimizing, just receiving it. Daniel was right, she said. He found something real, and it was real enough that she stopped. He wasn't wrong. He wasn't chasing something that wasn't there. Right about all of it. I know, Jack said. I knew he was right, she said. I've known for 7 years. Having someone else confirm it, her voice tightened slightly, and she pulled it back. It's different. Jack moved over on his side of the booth and gestured at the seat across from him, which was the closest he'd come to asking her to sit down. And Claire sat down, and she didn't say anything for a moment, and he was, and neither did he. And the noise of the diner moved around them without touching the particular quiet of that corner. He would have pushed me to fight, she said finally. Daniel, if he'd been here, he would have sat exactly where you're sitting, and he would have pushed me not to sell. You didn't need pushing, Jack said. No, she said. But it would have been nice to have someone in the corner. You've got someone in the corner, he said simply. She looked at him, at the leather vest, at the hands that were careful around a coffee cup and had built, through 3 years of Tuesday mornings, a kind of constancy she hadn't known she was relying on until the moment she needed it, and it was there. Why did you keep coming back? She said, every Tuesday. 3 years, you could have gone anywhere. He was quiet for a moment. The coffee's good, he said. She gave him a look. The coffee's mediocre, actually, she said. The biscuits then. He looked at her. After Maria died, he said, I didn't want to be around people who knew me. People who looked at me and saw the before and the after. People who were careful with me. He turned the coffee cup a quarter turn. You didn't know me before. You didn't look at me like something broken. He stopped. You just gave me a seat out of the draft and kept the cup full. He paused. Sometimes that's exactly enough. Claire looked at him and felt the specific weight of all the ordinary mornings that had built to this one, every cup of coffee, every quiet refill, every Tuesday that had simply been a Tuesday until the day it wasn't. I'm glad you kept coming back, she said. So am I, he said. The twist that broke something open came from Emily. At 3:30 in the afternoon, after most of the lunch crowd had gone, and the diner had settled into its quiet mid-afternoon rhythm, Emily came out of the back office with a piece of paper in her hand and a look on her face that stopped Claire mid-sentence in a conversation with Gerald about the next steps in the ownership case. What is it? Claire said. Emily put the paper on the counter. It was a printout of an email. I've been running the diner's social media, Emily said, since this whole thing started. Updates. Keeping people informed. She looked at Claire steadily. This came in this morning to the diner's email account. The Claire looked at the printout. It was from a address she didn't recognize. The subject line was blank. The body of the email was 4 sentences. Husband was a good man. He called me 3 days before he died. He told me what he had found, and he told me he'd made sure there was a backup. He said if anything happened to him, the backup was in the box with his notebooks. I should have come forward 7 years ago. I'm sorry it took this long. Claire read it twice. The kitchen was very quiet. He called someone, Emily said. Her voice was careful, and even the way her voice got when she was working very hard to stay steady. He told someone, 3 days before the accident. Claire, too, has said. I don't know, Emily said. Back, no response yet. Claire picked up the paper. She read it a third time. She thought about Daniel in his office 3 days before he died, making a phone call. Telling someone. Making sure there was a witness to the fact that he knew what he knew. Making sure there was someone who could say, if it ever came to it, he called me. He was alive and coherent, and he had the evidence, and he told me where he put it. He had done everything right. He had done absolutely everything right. Gerald, Claire said. Gerald had his reading glasses on before she finished saying his name. She handed him the email. He read it. He looked up. This is a potential witness to Daniel's knowledge in the days before his death. If we can identify TH and verify the communications, corroborates the intent, Claire said. He didn't just accidentally have those files. He deliberately preserved them and told someone where they were. It's premeditation in the opposite direction. He was protecting against exactly what happened. We need to find TH, Gerald said. I'm working on it, Emily said, and she was already back on the laptop. TH responded at 7:48 that evening. Claire was alone in the diner closing up when her phone lit up with a notification from the diner's email. She opened it immediately. The response was longer this time. My name is Thomas Hartley. I was Daniel's supervisor at Hartley Morse Associates. My name is on the company, which is why I've been afraid to come forward. I had a stake in the contracts that Caldwell's people were corrupting. I should have gone to the authorities when Daniel called me. I told myself it was speculation. I told myself to wait. 3 days later, he was dead, and I've spent 7 years telling myself it was an accident because the alternative was something I couldn't live with having stayed quiet about. I have records from that period. Correspondence that Daniel copied me on. I will speak to whoever needs to hear it. All of it. It's past time. Claire sat at the counter alone and read the email, and she felt something move through her that was too complex to name, not just relief, not just grief, not just the particular satisfaction of a truth refusing to stay buried. All of those things together, layered and real, and accompanied by the image of Daniel at his desk making a phone call, doing the last careful, responsible thing he could do before the world went wrong. He had told his supervisor. He had made a record of the record. He had been thorough right up to the very end. She called Jack, picked up on the first ring. Thomas Hartley, she said. Daniel's supervisor. He's willing to testify. He has correspondence. Jack Daniel copied him on the evidence. There are emails. There's a chain. A beat of silence. That's it, Jack said quietly. It's the whole case. I know, she said. Claire, I know, she said again. And her voice was full of things she was choosing not to name, because some things are too large for naming and need to simply exist for a while before they can be spoken properly. She stayed on the line with him for a few minutes, without saying much. She could hear the highway through the diner's walls, the occasional truck, the ordinary sound of the world continuing to move. She said finally, yeah, I don't know what happens with the criminal investigation. How long it takes or how far it goes or if it gets Caldwell or if Daniel ever gets the... She paused. The acknowledgement he deserved. It might take a while, Jack said honestly. No, she said. But Thomas Hartley sat with this for 7 years. Delgado sat with it. And Paul Garrett sat with it. And you know what? None of them forgot. None of them stopped knowing what they knew. Her voice steadied. The truth was always there. Was just waiting for someone to be brave enough to say it out loud. It waited for you, Jack said. It waited for all of us, she said. 6 months later, Caldwell was indicted on 7 counts of bribery, fraud, and conspiracy to corrupt public officials. Kevin Marsh pled guilty to 3 charges and cooperated fully with the prosecution, confirming a 7-year pattern of paying government employees for confidential infrastructure data. Ray Dunmore and Carl Hicks, the county planning officials Marta's brother-in-law had witnessed in that late-night meeting, were both charged and suspended pending trial. The investigation into Daniel's accident was formally reclassified as an open criminal inquiry. It wasn't justice, not yet, not completely. It was the machinery of justice turning, which was different from silence, and Claire understood the difference. The diner stayed open through all of it. The regulars came back, not just Earl and Marta, but the ones who had drifted away during the uncertainty, and new people too. People who had read the Sentinel stories or heard about the case and drove through Silver Creek and stopped because they'd heard about the place. Claire served them all the same way she served everyone. Black coffee, eggs scrambled, biscuits with extra black pepper. Thomas Hartley came in one Sunday. And he was 70, gray-haired, and he sat at the counter and he said to Claire, I should have come forward sooner. I'll spend a long time being sorry about that. You came forward, she said. Too late, you came forward, she said again. Not absolution, she wasn't offering absolution because it wasn't hers to give. stated simply that he was here, that he had eventually done the right thing, that sometimes people take too long and do it anyway. Runs. Daniel trusted you enough to call you. He thought you were worth calling. Pressed his lips together hard. Then he nodded. She poured his coffee. The Tuesday morning it all came together in the way that mattered. Most didn't announce itself. An ordinary morning. Cold for Arizona. The kind of dry desert cold that has no humidity to soften it. Claire had the first pot of coffee ready at 6:58. She had the biscuits in the oven. She turned the open sign on and breathed in the morning and told herself what she had told herself for 12 years. Was. Except this time she didn't need to convince herself of it. She was genuinely actually fine. Earl came in at 7:30, sat at the counter, black coffee, 2 eggs scrambled. Morning Claire, morning Earl. The world in its proper order. Marta came in and sat by the window and ordered her oatmeal and said, "You look good today," and meant it. Emily was behind the counter by 8, managing the register and talking on the morning customers with the easy confidence of someone who had learned in the past 6 months that she was more capable than she had known, and that the diner was as much her place as it had ever been Claire's. At 8:47, the bell above the door jangled. Jack Ryder walked in wearing his Hell's Angels vest, and he looked around the diner the way he always looked around it when he first came in, not suspicious, just observant, the habit of a man who pays attention, and his eyes found Claire behind the counter, and he nodded and she nodded back. He walked to the corner booth. He sat down with his back to the wall, facing the door. She brought his coffee without being asked. Black. No sugar. Set it in front of him, and he wrapped both hands around it, and she stood there for a moment. You know, she said, "You don't have to sit back here by yourself every time." "I like it back here," he said. "There's a perfectly good counter. Counter stools are uncomfortable. The booth by the window gets better light. I don't need better light." She looked at him. He looked back at her with the particular steadiness that she had stopped finding unreadable and had started finding simply honest. "You just like your booth," she said. "I like my booth," he said. She refilled his cup even though he'd only taken 1 sip. She said, "Yeah, I've been thinking about what you said ago, that you kept coming back because I didn't look at you like something broken." She held his gaze. "I want you to know you were never broken. Not to me. And carrying something heavy. That's different." For a moment. "So were you," he said. "No," she said. "We both were." And now, she thought about the sign above the door, the deed with her name on it, about Marsh in custody and Caldwell in court, and Thomas Hartley finally speaking, and 7 years of truth refusing to stay buried. About Emily behind the counter, Mark by the window, and Earl on his stool, and 9 motorcycles in a courthouse parking lot on a Thursday morning. "Now," she said, "I think we're both exactly where we're supposed to be." Jack looked at her. Something moved across his face, slow and real, the way things move when they've been working their way to the surface for a long time. He said, "I think so too." She walked back to the counter. The morning crowd had picked up. There were 3 new tables to tend. Earl needed a refill. Emily was calling something to her from the kitchen. The diner was noisy and warm, and entirely, completely alive. Claire Whitmore picked up the coffee pot and got back to work. She had a diner to run. She had people to take care of. She had a life that was still being built, piece by piece, morning by morning, cup by cup. And in the corner booth, a man in a Hell's Angels vest drank his coffee and watched the door and stayed. He had been staying for 3 years. He intended to keep at it. Some people come into your life like a storm and change everything in an instant. And some people come in quietly every Tuesday morning and stay until staying becomes the most important thing they've ever done. Claire Whitmore had asked a stranger for the impossible on the worst morning of her year. He had said one word, "okay," and changed the direction of everything that followed. Not because he was fearless, not because he was powerful, but because he had been treated with decency by a woman who didn't know his story on him, and he had decided quietly and completely that decency deserved to be returned in kind. The diner's sign still said Whitmore's in faded red letters above the door. It would say that for as long as the building stood, and every Tuesday morning, rain or dry, cold or blazing, ordinary or extraordinary, the coffee would be hot, the booth in the corner would be taken, and the woman behind the counter would keep doing what she had always done, and treating every person who walked through her door like someone worth seeing, because that was who she was. That was who she had always been. And it turned out, in the end, that was the most powerful thing in the world.